for us? Perfect. It's got to alert all of you that that's happening very loudly, and we appreciate that. Before I introduce our panelists, I did also want to sort of note that we are just one day into bill filing, pre-filing here in Missouri. We really considered as a staff whether we should bump our forum this week so we had more pre-filing time, or if it felt like we could go ahead and use the knowledge that we already have, our expectations of what's going to happen during session, and the number of bills that have been pre-filed, and create a good forum for you all. We decided to go ahead and move forward with today's First Friday planning, even though knowing that things are rapidly changing in the Missouri legislature at all beginnings of all sessions. And so we are providing to you what we know, the best we know, and we'll sort of see how things move forward. Some of what we know is because of the time that we spend in the Capitol and the relationships we have with lawmakers, as well as our own expectations. But that could change. We're all humans. And then finally, kind of our agenda and how we're going to move forward today. We're going to start by introducing the panel. We're going to let them really introduce themselves, their own bios if they want to do that, share a little bit about their expectations for session. Holly Honig and Mallory Rusch are on staff. They'll provide a little bit of what Empower Missouri expects over the session. Jeremy is our contract lobbyist. He's going to share a little bit about his knowledge and what he expects over the session for our anti-poverty agendas. And then we will move on to the next speaker. At the end, we'll have an opportunity for questions. So again, put those in the chat box or hold on to them until that time. And then we'll ask you to fill out our evaluation and let you all go by 1 o'clock. So our first speaker is Mallory Rusch. She's our executive director here at Empower Missouri. After she has sort of shared what she'd like to, we're going to invite Jeremy LaFaver at Stateline Strategies to share with us his expertise and knowledge after lots of time in the Missouri State Capitol. And then Holly Honig, our really fantastic policy director here at Empower Missouri, will kind of wrap us up, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions. So I'm going to turn my slides off, and I'm going to ask Mallory to go ahead and get us started today.
Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to do my best. I'm going to do my best to stay on video. As my team knows, I am living down in Bonne Terre, Missouri right now, and the wireless is not great. The Wi-Fi is not great. So if I turn into a robot, which is what happens to my teams a lot, they'll hear my voice sort of go electronic. Please do let me know in the chat or just shout it out, and I will turn my camera off, and that way I think you'll be able to hear me a little better, but maybe it'll be all good today. We'll see. Fingers crossed. So as Sarah said, my name is Mallory Rusch. I've been the executive director here at Empower for 2 years this month, which feels wild. In a lot of ways, it feels like I've been on the team for about a day or a week or a month, but in other ways, it feels like it's been 5 or 10 years. So it's been a real joy and just a really incredible experience to work with and build out our team here at Empower over the last couple of years. I came to Empower after working for over a decade in the direct service space, working with several other nonprofits, and in all of those roles just found myself sort of consistently coming up against policy barriers and really wanted to be able to work to address those policy barriers instead of feeling constantly stymied by them. And so I was thrilled to be able to make the shift more into the policy world. I've been really active in the Capitol for the last 2 sessions, but set a goal to really focus on building out our policy staff over the last year. And so I'm excited what it will look like this session to have a really robust policy team of our advocates in the Capitol, which will actually likely lead me to take a step back from some of our direct legislative advocacy and leaving that in the hands, the very, very capable hands of Holly, our 4 amazing policy managers, and Jeremy. This is hopefully going to allow me to focus on continuing to grow our staff so that we have more representation and more of a presence in every corner of our state. Some of you know that we hired new staff this year in both Springfield and the Lake of the Ozarks region, which represented a really good piece of geographic growth for us, hoping to expand that even further to add staff in Central Missouri and Southeast Missouri as well. Want to work on continuing to grow our coalitions and our partnerships both in and out of Missouri, all of which is towards building the infrastructure for long-term power and relationships in the Capitol and beyond. So I'm excited to be here today. Always will continue to be really involved in our legislative strategy work, but will hopefully be over the course of the session taking more of a step back from the day-to-day role that I've had in the Capitol the last 2 years. So thinking about the upcoming legislative session, there's just like a few things that I wanted to talk through that hopefully, might be interesting to folks as far as like what I'm expecting to happen in this session. So, obviously we just had midterm elections, and that always is going to bring many new faces into the Capitol building. We have 49 newly elected members of the House of Representatives and 8 new members of the Senate, 6 of whom are coming up from the House. So they are known entities and in some cases, great partners of ours. So excited to see those folks sort of move over to the other chamber. We also have 2 brand new senators. And so it's always really exciting to have new members with new ideas coming into both chambers. We're really looking forward to working with those folks and have actually already started doing that one-on-one outreach to all of our new legislators, making sure that we have an opportunity to introduce ourselves and introduce our staff ahead of session, really making sure that folks know who Empower Missouri is, what our expertise is, and where they can come to us if they have questions. A lot of folks are coming to this work in the Capitol without a background in the social sector. And so, may not know about, the federal definition of a food desert, or may not understand the different categories of affordable housing. And so we want to be sure that we can be a really excellent resource to those folks. And we're actually putting together something that I'm really excited about that I hope will become a new tradition for our new legislators every 2 years. And that's that we're going to put together a mini podcast series just for new legislators. Sorry. But we're going to do a little overview of all of our sort of key topic areas so that, we know a lot of these folks are going to be spending a lot of time in the car over the next couple of months going back and forth to Jeff City. And so hopefully it's just a way that folks can get sort of the anti-poverty 101. So we're excited to be working on those and to get those out to our legislators here starting in the next couple of weeks. So, it's odd numbered years are always interesting because you have new faces coming into the building, but it's also a non-election year, which builds and brings both benefits and challenges. There certainly is often less external pressure or political considerations in a non-election year where no one is running for re-election or, climbing the ladder to the next position, as we had many politicians throughout the state doing in the last session. So it'll be nice to have some of that distraction removed. But sometimes those forces actually work in our favor, right? Voters tend to pay a little bit more attention in an election year. And so, I think one of our goals is to work to build a culture where we are having folks pay good attention to what's happening in our legislature, regardless of when the next election year is. And all of you being here today is an amazing start to that. And I appreciate all of your interest and, willingness to engage in the work that is ahead. A few things that we are going to be watching pretty closely right here at the start of session. So we are well aware that there are going to be many initiative bills filed that are related to the initiative petition process in Missouri. Last year, I believe there was a total of 21 bills filed in that space that did one of two things: either worked to raise the bar for getting an initiative on the ballot in the first place for folks to be able to vote on, or raising the bar as to the number of votes that it would take to be able to pass something that was introduced to voters by a citizen-led initiative petition. And so, we know that there are going to be a percentage of legislators who are feeling really frustrated about the passage of Amendment 3, which is the legalization of recreational marijuana, and that is going to likely be the next sort of focal point as they work to change the initiative petition process, which is something that we really strongly oppose here at Empower Missouri. Many of you who have been with us for a while have heard us talk about this a lot in the past, and will hear us talk a lot about it in the future. But the reason why we feel like this is so important is that many of the pieces of legislation, really big key pieces of legislation that have passed in the last 10 years that really protect the rights and expand the rights of families who are earning low incomes in the state, were accomplished through the initiative petition process. And we are aware that there are going to be other initiatives upcoming that we think that voters would really like to see. I think a strong example of something that has been discussed is if we could do an initiative petition in Missouri around paid family leave and paid sick leave, and making that a requirement in the state. We're really aware that there's a really strong appetite for that in the community, but less of an appetite for it within the legislature. And so, we really see these changes to the initiative petition process as an attempt to block the will of voters in Missouri and potentially subvert some policies that would be enormously impactful for working families across the state. And so we are going to do our best to make sure that there are no changes to that process. We've demonstrated in the past it's already very rigorous and does not need to be amended. So that is going to be one of the things that we're watching pretty closely. Another related to Amendment 3 is that we think it's pretty likely that there could be some follow-up legislation filed to Amendment 3. Now, because it was done as a constitutional amendment, that language can't be changed without a vote of the people, but there was a lot of room sort of within that bill for legislators to, change like the caps on the number of licenses that are provided, look more at the criminal penalties under the new law, all of that sort of stuff. So we'll be watching that very closely, and of course, wanting to make sure that there are definitely no changes to any of the expungement provisions, which were our primary reason for supporting the bill in the first place. We also noticed yesterday, as we were watching the very first bills to be filed, that there are a number of bills that were filed on day one to put the City of St. Louis Police Department back under state control. This is something that we strongly oppose as an organization. We believe really firmly that law enforcement should be held in local control, as it is for every single municipality in the state of Missouri, with the exception of Kansas City. And we would love to see that change in Kansas City as well. We think that local control of the police is a very important issue. I won't get into all the details there. You'll hear us talk a lot about it this session. So that's going to be a thing that we look at a lot, and our Criminal Justice Coalition will work on a lot. I'm interested to see if the death penalty rises to a level of conversation or interest. It really didn't last session. There was a bill filed by Representative Tony Lavasco last session to abolish the death penalty in Missouri. It didn't get a lot of traction, but I'm I'm curious if it will be a hot topic in this session, given that Missouri carried out an execution this week and has 2 more executions scheduled in January and February. So it's possible that that could end up gaining more traction or attention. So we're going to keep a really close eye on that. Empower Missouri does oppose the death penalty, and actually, our blog that came out this morning for the week details greatly why we oppose the death penalty. So check that out if you're interested. And then I think the last thing that I am really sort of like keeping an eye on at a broad level is that there's been a lot of conversation around the minimum wage, not the state level minimum wage, which we are still slowly working our way up to that $12 an hour, almost there. That's going to happen here in the next few weeks, actually. But actually looking at the minimum wage for public employees, for folks who work for the state, which was debated a lot last session. And there's also going to be some legislation around pay for public school teachers. Missouri is currently 50th in the nation for starting teacher pay, which is an enormous issue, not only for the stability of our public education system, but also for the families of teachers and making sure that they're able to earn a good income and support themselves and their families. So we're going to be looking at that too. Excited to see we made really good headway on a couple of key issues this year, and I just want to highlight those for you, that we're hoping we can bring a couple of these bills across the finish line this year. I think Holly might talk more about these, but one that we're definitely looking at again is the restaurant meals program. So allowing folks who are elderly, disabled, or homeless to use their existing SNAP benefit to purchase hot meals. We're a really strong proponent of that, and it will be refiled by Senator Angela Mosley. For some reason that I can't fathom, the state of Missouri decided that today, the second day of filing, would be an amazing day to launch a brand new Senate website for the state of Missouri, senate.mo.gov. Go check it out. And because of that, none of the Senate bills that have been filed have the actual bill language attached to them. So we don't actually really know what's been filed in the Senate and what's going on, because some tech genius at the state thought that that was going to be a really smart idea. Turns out it wasn't. Other things we're watching, we worked a lot of you know, on private probation. That's going to continue to be a huge focus of ours. There's a bill that we would see as a very small stepping stone to a larger piece of legislation that looks at restricting the ability of private probation companies to require drug and alcohol testing for people for whom drugs and alcohol had no role in their crime. So that's a thing we're going to be looking at closely. It has a new sponsor this year. And then we'll also be continuing to work on requiring insurance companies to provide an annual supply of birth control, which is a particular issue in rural communities where it can be really hard for women to be able to make the trip to a pharmacy on a monthly basis to pick up birth control. So that's something we're going to continue to work on. I am over my time, but I have to squeeze in before I hand it over to Jeremy. That, of course, the single biggest thing that we are going to be working on this session, which if you've been following us at all thus far, you know, is the clean slate legislation. So in legislation that is going to be filed today by Senator-elect Curtis Trent out of Springfield and Representative Phil Cristofanelli out of St. Charles. We are seeking to replace Missouri's expensive, time-consuming, and very complicated petition-based expungement process, and instead enact a new automated expungement process, which should bring relief to tens of thousands of Missourians who are carrying the weight of an old criminal record around with them that has had a lifelong impact on their ability to get safe and stable housing, as well as gainful employment. We have been working with many wonderful partners across the political spectrum to develop this legislation over the last 2 years. I'm going to shout out some partners really quickly. Missouri Coalition of Recovery Support Providers, the Justice Action Network, the Missouri Worker Center, the American Conservative Union and its Nolan Center for Justice, the Missouri State Chapter of the NAACP, the Recovery Opportunity Center in Columbia, the St. Louis chapter of All of Us or None, Americans for Prosperity, and our great partners at the University of Missouri Kansas City Law School. So huge cheers to all those folks and their work that went into getting this bill signed. Hopefully you'll see a lot of media on it. Our sponsors are doing a press conference on Tuesday to talk more with the media. So stay tuned for some good media coverage. We're going into this session feeling really excited about the bipartisan support behind this initiative and the wonderful network of partners who are ready to advocate for this important policy change. We'll be providing updates really regularly through all of our normal social media and newsletter channels, but you can also sign up for our Clean Slate specific monthly newsletter at www.mocleanslate.org. Ooh, okay, sorry for going over, but with that, I will kick it over to our awesome contract lobbyist, Jeremy.
Thanks, appreciate it. Awesome contract lobbyists are not things that are often said together, but I appreciate it. Lobbyists are kind of like lawyers. Nobody really likes them until you need one. But it is good to know that Empower Missouri has got not just me, but we've got a team of folks that work with us that are monitoring the Capitol every day and making sure that your priorities have a voice up there with all the other ones. So I've been asked to just kind of give a brief sort of introduction of me. I got started in the New Mexico legislature, drafting bills and then helping write appropriations legislation. Then I moved to Missouri in 2009 and started in the legislature advocating on behalf of children's advocacy organizations throughout the state. I eventually served a couple of terms in the Missouri legislature and sat on the budget committee and kind of got a good view of how the legislature works, kind of being on the inside. And now I'm back on the outside and I work on behalf of a lot of organizations like Empower Missouri and Missouri Budget Project and some education issues and a handful of other things that are important to the folks of the state. So wanted to talk also a little bit just kind of how the elections ended up. Again, I think you saw GOP majorities in the House and the Senate, and then this is the first time, gosh, in a long time, decades and decades, that all of the statewide office holders are held by Republicans. And so it's definitely the first time that there's been one party control and then super majorities in the legislature for as long as I've been alive and quite some time before then. In previous sessions, there was a lot of disagreement, strife, particularly in the Senate amongst sort of a group of senators that had sort of self-described themselves as the conservative caucus, and they combated quite a bit with the traditional Republican leadership. That caucus has since disbanded, and an initial member of theirs who had kind of left but kind of came back has been elected to leadership, and that's Cindy O'Loughlin, and she's now the floor leader, and Caleb Rowden is the pro tem. I think that Cindy's presence and leadership provides a number of interesting things. I think she has proven to work really, really well with Senator Arthur and a number of other female senators to come to consensus on a host of important issues. And so I think there's a lot of benefit. There's a sense of, consensus building there. But she is also a very, very conservative person and will certainly drive her caucus's priorities forward. The other interesting thing is that the Senate has been run the last few years by Caleb Rowden, who was fine with running, you put a bill up in the Missouri Senate and state senators can stand and talk on an issue for as long as they like. They call that the filibuster. Many of you probably have heard about that. And they can kill a bill by doing that. and doing it all night. Cindy has been one of the lone or most vocal members to say that doing that until late at night is not a good way to make public policy, and she's not going to run the Senate that way. So that presents opportunities for individual senators potentially to leverage their ability to filibuster with her leadership. Everybody comes in to the legislative session with a plan until you get punched in the face, and then you start ducking and moving from there. And so who knows if she sticks to that pledge to not go late at night. But I would suspect that the Senate is going to operate much more cordially in the sense that there is not going to be a lot of strife between Republicans. They are largely going to be united this year, and that the significant priorities of the GOP majority will likely move out of that chamber with somewhat ease, depending on how much of a backstop other individual senators in the minority party are able to put up. In the House, we have a new batch of leadership as well. John Patterson from the Kansas City area. He's a physician, a surgeon, practices in Kansas City, a thoughtful, good lawmaker. And so he'll be running, deciding which bills come before the floor. And then at the speaker's spot, you've got Dean Plocker, who's from the suburbs of St. Louis and is not as much of a conservative or social conservative as Speaker Haar and Speaker Vescovo were. So I think you'll see much more of a business focused mind. I think pros and cons there are, they'll want to reduce or eliminate corporate income tax. But then there are also things where on some poverty issues where businesses have aligned with Empower Missouri, where I think that will be an important voice, and we'll have the ability to do that. And we've got great relationships with each member of leadership. And so we suspect that while we may not always agree with them on the policy decision, we're comfortable that we'll have an open door there and be engaged in the discussion and know that we'll be a part of that conversation. So that's good. I also, and I had it on my list of things, but the priorities that I think are going to move forward, it's great that Empower has been able to build the relationship with Representative Krista Finelli and incoming Senator Curtis Trent. Having them sponsor the clean slate legislation is a great get, and I would suspect that those bills would receive priority placements and will receive quite a bit of attention and action, and hopefully head to the finish line. The other thing the biggest piece that I'm worried about from Empower's standpoint is IP reform. Again, last legislative session, there was a lot of disagreement between the speaker and the floor leader in the House, and then the floor leader and the pro tem and the Senate, and everybody kind of disagreed with the governor. There are not, at least as session starts, there are not those interpersonal conflicts that are wedging some of those things. I think we've got a number of folks on the other side of the aisle that agree with us, but each member of leadership is aligned on this particular issue. And I suspect that at the end of the day, it'll come down to the best deal that can be cut, because it feels like an important priority to every member of leadership and the governor's office. So we'll be building a strong coalition of folks to make sure that we have the best leverage that we can, but that's a significant one that I'm worried about this session. I think that was my assigned tasks, and I almost kept it or got us back on track on time. So with that, I will send it to my friend and colleague Holly to take it away from there.
Cool. Thanks, Jeremy. So I'm Holly Honig. I am Empower Missouri's policy director. I moved to Missouri from Michigan to join Mallory and Sarah and the rest of the incredible folks at Empower Missouri in June. I'm thrilled to be here with you all as we prepare for the 2023 legislative session together. As policy director, I provide broad oversight of our policy work in food security, affordable housing, and community justice, essentially focusing my work, the work of our policy managers and our coalitions in those areas to secure basic human needs and equal justice for every person in Missouri. My goal today is to provide you with an overview of each coalition's priorities and give you a sense for what we think is possible this year, what may take more of a long-term view, what we'll be watching, and other hopes that we may have leaning into the session. So starting with housing, our Affordable Housing Coalition is focused on topics and policies around eviction defense, reducing tenant harms, and increasing tenant power. I would say policies that may focus around low-income housing tax credits and Missouri Housing Development Commission. So the bulk of any legislative work for this session in this particular policy area will likely be reacting and responding to legislation, while the work groups continue to explore both legislative and administrative and even community organizing options, such as stopping and reversing eviction trends in our state. So among the possible solutions being researched there and looking at is implementing and enforcing tenant right to counsel, or alternatives such as mediation, finding ways to extend the time period between tenants' first notice and first hearing. We'll also be paying attention to LIHTC programmatic issues, improvements hoping to focus on what will have the biggest impact, what people are passionate about, and what's viable. So things that may include exclusionary zoning practices, the increasing the LIHTC housing availability, increasing the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, improving the LIHTC application process, finding ways to extend affordability periods of the existing LIHTC housing supply. When we look at tenant rights issues that we're working on and we'll be paying special attention to, that will include a source of income protection to eliminate landlord income discrimination, lowering or eliminating rental application fees, addressing variances in landlord licensing inspections and accountability, and bringing Missouri back into compliance with the Federal Fair Housing Act. The nature of our work at Empower Missouri often focuses on safety net programs, and so our food security coalition often finds itself in those battles. So Mallory mentioned earlier the restaurant meals program. Other areas that the Food Security Coalition will be focusing on this session is working with legislators to find ways to opt out of the felony SNAP bans, addressing food deserts using tax credits for urban farms, as well as small specialty crop farms, possible provisions, regarding soil and water. And then another component that we're really excited about is the Elderly Simplified Application Project, acronym is ESAP. And so we know that from recent data, that lots of eligible adults age 60 and older don't participate in the SNAP program. It's burdensome, it has a huge impact. And so ESAP is a set of waivers that we're hoping to see the Missouri Department of Social Services that would request from the USDA, who administers the SNAP program, to help people gain access, and for folks who are already accessing benefits, avoid disruptions in benefits. Shifting to our Community Justice Coalition, we're going to have a lot to react and respond to. And Mallory already talked about the police funding earlier. When we look at our reentry work group in the Community Justice Coalition, they'll be looking at issues of ID access for folks coming home from prison without proper IDs. That presents barriers for folks returning home and being able to find work and provide for oneself. Our pretrial and trial issues will include, among other things, the challenges and burdens of the privatized probation companies. Mallory also touched on that a little bit earlier. We already saw that pre-filed bill that she mentioned. our coalition continues to do research into better understanding the scope and scale of the harms brought on by private supervision. When we look at incarceration, we're expecting to see a bill coming to address the institution of a DOC, a Department of Corrections Oversight Committee. And then finally, again, we're just most excited about our Clean Slate campaign. Mallory touched on that. We've got the link to the website in there and would be really thrilled to talk more about that if anyone has interest in learning about the details there. And I think finally, what I'd love to just leave on is we are going to be hosting our Advocacy Week of Action the first week of April at the Capitol. And we hope to see you all there, and we'll be posting more information about that in the coming month for folks to come and join us.
Excellent. Thanks to all three of you. You ended up wrapping early, so everybody ran through their things very quickly. Good job. That always feels powerful to me because I talk very quickly, and it feels like a benefit, right? That I can use that skill set to make up time when it's needed. So I appreciate that from all of you. I'm going to start. There are not a lot of questions in the chat box. Please stick your questions in the chat box, or I will, offer you the opportunity to come off mute and just ask with your voice here in a moment. I want to start though, Jeremy, Mallory, you both mentioned IP reform. And so I just would like to come back to that. What is initiative petition reform? Why do we care about it? What does that look like in Missouri?
You bet. I'm happy to take that, and Mallory, jump in or correct me when I'm wrong. Yeah, so IP reform is the reforming the way the initiative petition process works in Missouri. And the initiative petition process is the way the people are able to change the Constitution or change laws. And I say the people because sometimes the reason there's a thought that it needs to be reformed is that large special interest groups pay for great big campaign efforts to, sway the people through, AstroTurf efforts to change the vote. At the end of the day, the people are the ones who get to vote on it and do change it. As you're aware, through this legislature, there are not many progressive, large progressive items that stand a great big chance of passage. And so lately, that's been reserved, big items, major policy items have been reserved to the ballot: Medicaid expansion, legalization, anti-right to work, to repeal that went to the ballot. And the legislature, of course, wanting the power, wants to be able to limit the ability of people to change that, and they want to be the ones that have the power to do that. And so there's been a bunch of ideas on how to do that. It's to get on the petition now, or to get on the ballot now, and I'm not going to get all the numbers right, but you have to get a certain percentage of signatures from each of the congressional, or from 5 of the 8 congressional districts, I believe. And the way they want to change that, there's a whole host of different ways, is to increase the number of signatures that you need, increase the number of congressional districts that need a percentage of signatures, and then also increase the threshold at which initiative petition measures can be enacted into law or can change the Constitution. And so we've seen as high as requiring the vote to hit a 60% threshold, which on an IP issue is virtually impossible. South Dakota, I think it was 55% Medicaid expansion. So if they had 60, it wouldn't have passed. They actually had on, I think it was South Dakota, maybe I'm wrong here, but they had on their ballot to change the initiative petition to 60%. That failed. And then Medicaid expansion passed with 50% or 55. Had that passed ahead of time, their Medicaid expansion vote would have failed because it didn't get the threshold. And so that's why it's particularly important. It's been a major driving issue for a number of years. Special interest group like the Realtors organization gets heavily involved because they have run initiative petitions in the past. And they want to make sure that the initiative petitions that they've run stay enshrined and don't come under attack But they also, want to make sure that they're able to get done what they need to get done. So there are a lot of, it's not just a philosophical issue. There are large special interest groups that have particular interest in how this works out on both sides of the aisle. And it will take building a robust coalition amongst our folks as well as people on the right to make sure that whatever happens, if anything happens, doesn't stifle the voice of the people so much that this is no longer a viable option. That was a lot of words. Hopefully that answered the question. You're on mute,
It's a
Mallory.
complicated process. Mallory, you are muted. I saw you
Sorry.
figuratively, I imagine, looking for the actual numbers. So
I did. That's exactly what I was doing. Yes. It's time to dust off that document anyway. So most of for bills that looked to raise the number of, about half the bills that were filed last year were about like raising or included a provision to raise the number of signatures. Right now, in order to get something on the ballot, you have to get 8% signatures from 8% of registered voters in 2/3 of the 8 congressional districts in the state. That's like a very complicated mathematical equation. But one of the reasons why it's 2/3 of districts and not all of districts is because it's Missouri, and we have a couple of really rural congressional districts where it would be incredibly challenging to get 8% of registered voters to sign something. It would make the petition process actually way more expensive than it is right now. Several of the proposals included a metric that said that they wanted 10% of all voters in the state, or 10% of voters in each of the 8 congressional districts. So we basically did the math and calculated that out. It's about 200,000 additional signatures total. So it's a really significant amount that they would be looking to raise it by on that side of things. So it's also, I think, important to know, and Jeremy touched on this, that the vast majority of states that have an initiative petition process do just have a simple majority. There's only a handful of states that have a higher threshold. And I think one of our biggest talking points has really been that, there are 2 ways that changes to our Constitution get on the ballot. They can get on through the initiative petition process, or they can be submitted by the General Assembly. The thing that I think has been really frustrating is that most of the bills that have been filed to amend the initiative petition process only require a higher threshold of votes for bills that come through that process, and not for bills that are submitted by the General Assembly. So, when Jeremy talked about compromise, I think like one of our big pushes will be to say, if you are going to raise the threshold, you need to raise it for every single constitutional amendment that gets put on the ballot, regardless of if it comes from the people or from the legislature. There's just no reason why there should be a higher threshold for legislation that's suggested by the people and not that's suggested by the legislature. So that will be a big talking point of ours that you hear throughout the session.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you. There's a conversation happening in the chat box a little bit about 4-day school weeks, and many districts in the state are turning to 4-day school weeks, partially due to that teacher pay issue that Mallory talked about before. That means we're losing teachers in many of our districts. And so one way that we can make that resource stretch further is a 4-day school week. There are a variety of other components that play into that. But there are absolutely implications for households that struggle to meet their basic needs. Lots of lower wage households use a public school system as childcare, right? And so now suddenly here's a full day that's not offered to you. Many students receive free meals there, 2 meals a day, lower income students. And so what happens when those households suddenly don't have that for a 5th day, et cetera? So if any of you want to kind of expand on that, think through Empower's thoughts on it, et cetera.
I will also say that issue has come up among, as a point of contention in the education community, particularly school board members, because there are some rural districts that they don't have the ability to pay people a ton of money. And so they use it as an extra draw to say, look, we only have a 4-day school week, and that's their ability to recruit teachers. And so it's one of those issues where you can't even find unanimity among the education community about pros or cons. I think most everybody would say yes, 5 days a week is better, but with a lack of funding from Jefferson City, they're left to explore creative ways to recruit and retain highly qualified educators. Going through here, 172, Brian Seitz. I thought that was interesting because Representative Seitz files some pretty conservative stuff, and so it'd be interesting to see that. It's also, he has filed 15 or 20 bills, and so which one is going to be his priority, I'm not really sure. And so we'll take a look at it, but we'll see how much weight he puts behind it. Sometimes people file things so that they can send a press release too. So we'll take a look at it. State has surplus money, opportunity for empower issues. I think there are opportunities there with the surplus money. Depends on how, there are opportunities there. It's one-time funding, and so additional recurring service money is just not something the legislature wants to dive into, because they know that in a couple of years they'll be blamed for taking it away when the money isn't there anymore. But there are also, there's an appetite for tax cuts, which, you can leverage that for, an earned income tax credit or a child tax credit, or, you don't get 100% of what you want, but you can get, if you're willing to take a little of this, you can leverage it and take a little bit of that. And so I think there's some opportunity there with the money. Of course, there's opportunities for, organizations that need one-time or capital expenditures as well.
Yeah, and I think, making sure I was not muted. I think that the one space where we are really eager to capitalize on that surplus is on Clean Slate, and as well as looking at the implementation of Amendment 3, because the court system in the state and the central repository of records need a significant amount of tech upgrades. There's been an ongoing effort that already exists for this. There's a state, I can never get this name right, Committee on Court Automation, I think. And so that is something that, we know that when this bill comes back, when the bill's filed, it's likely going to have a pretty significant fiscal note on it because of the infrastructure upgrades that are needed. But we're very hopeful that because that would be a one-time expense for the state, that they're interested in making that investment. And actually our colleagues in Oklahoma who passed Clean Slate last year, in fact used ARPA funding specifically to fund the infrastructure upgrades that were needed to their record system. So we're hoping we can emulate what they did here in Missouri as well.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. I just want to give a minute if there is anybody who really was raring to ask a question with their voice instead of in the chat box. I do want to allow space for that before we wrap up. I did promise you. I always keep my promises. Okay, I'm going to assume that there's not, since no one's interrupting me or coming off mute. So I want to thank all of our panelists very much. I have a few announcements, and then I'm going to ask you to do our survey as well. we go. I have 2 screens, and every time I feel like that should be enough, and it still feels like I really just need a 3rd screen. So Empower Missouri has a handful of upcoming events we want to make sure that you are invited to and know about. There are happy hours coming in Springfield, Kansas City, and St. Louis. This is an opportunity to interact with our staff, but also lawmakers. We have invited many, many lawmakers to each of those events. And so we hope that you come out, interact with your elected officials, ask them questions, get to know them. It's important that we do that all year long. So very excited. You can ask them your questions leading into session and learn a little bit more about them. Remember, building that relationship is one step to becoming a very effective advocate and really working for change at the Missouri Legislature. Our spring forums will begin again January 6th. There's no break, so I don't know why, but it feels like a new year. So it's going to be a new opportunity. In our survey every month, we ask you what you want to hear about. And so we will make those decisions here soon. We would really love if you have ideas, topics, things you want to learn about, please be sure and put that in the survey for us. You can learn more about our upcoming forums and all of our offerings at empowermissouri.org. Our podcast is returning. We did this a little bit last legislative session, and I am very excited to share this chance with Holly moving forward. Our goal is to create a quick podcast once a week, 15 minutes or less every week, where you're just going to learn what happened in Jeff City, stay on top of what's going on, and fit it into whatever your schedule is like, listening while you drive to work or at the gym or walking the dog or making dinner, etc. We feel that that knowledge is really impactful and important and needs to be shared. So you'll get to hear from Holly and I about what happened the week before. We'll also have special guests. Some folks who are on today's forum are very likely to find themselves with an invitation to join us at some point over session. So please plan to do that. You can currently subscribe to that on Amazon Music and Spotify, and will be available everywhere by the time session gets going. Ideally, these are out of our hands often. So, and that is really it for me. Thank you so much for your time today. I have put the link in the chat box to fill out our survey, and we always just like to give you 5 minutes at the end of our time together to do it now, so that you don't forget, don't have to come back. You have time built into your time right now with us. So we would appreciate that so much. And we'll stick around for the next couple of minutes if you have any other questions or needs during that time, but for sure, please fill out that survey for us.